Immersion is important because in most games it exceeds expectations. While none of this is something that's required in Dungeons & Dragons, it keeps things fresh. Well, yes, theater of the mind can work just great, and you really need nothing more than character sheet, dice, and a good story. Having more can give people incentive when things start to drag, or they forget why they started playing Dungeons & Dragons in the first place. That reason to keep people excited and coming back, because some of that spark was lost over the pandemic. Yes, it was still Dungeons & Dragons, but whether it be over Discord or staring at blank screens, it takes away some of that magic. And there is a reason why certain things in Dungeons & Dragons stand out, whether it's be when we watch performances in Critical Role. There's something magical that can happen, that we want to happen, that doesn't always happen at a normal game, but it doesn't mean we can't help it along. There are many ways to do this. One is battle maps. This is pretty simple, though it can potentially be the most costly option. Battle maps that require miniatures and things like that, and different ones each time, is a big investment, especially for people who just play D&D casually. And I do think this can be done by those, a lot of these things can be done by those who do play things casually, but it does, like, battle maps don't have to be this ordeal. Whether it be using Legos, making, there are some really good tutorials online if you want to make props really cheap. There are tons of resources out there. So yes, that's always an option. But once again, this is something that changes every time and can be a very big investment. One thing I like to implement, I mean, one of the easiest implementations is music. This can do bounds, especially when you didn't have music before and you bring it on these big moments. One of my favorite music is this, I had this Coliseum ambience music that I played during one of my favorite moments in my first campaign, and it really just helped that atmosphere, and that session, something really clicked in sort of how I run things, and I felt that just the entire combat really came to life. Now, I understand that not all DMs like to do voices, but even just doing this a little bit can go a long way. I know none of these concepts are revolutionary, but there is value in the simple things. What I like to do is I'll practice voices in the shower or someplace where I have considerable amount of privacy, so later I feel comfortable doing it in front of people where I don't mess up or feel silly. And understanding that the tabletop is a place where people can feel silly. They can be free to throw aside judgment and encourage each other to roleplay and act silly. And voices can go a long way because it makes it more believable that you're talking to different people, changing postures, mannerisms. Having really compelling and memorable characters are something that stands out in players' minds and can be the highlight, I mean, as they often are. You have so many stories about beloved NPCs by different parties because they are memorable when you make them memorable. One recent implementation I put in that I've really enjoyed is costumes. Now, these don't have to be extravagant. Merely having a cane or a cloak for a character can make them seem different and has a sense of immersion that wasn't there before. I even just use a bed sheet as I normally like to use a few different props for each outfit. I had a gang member who wore one of those like kind of British caps, a kind of tough guy's jacket, and then bandages around their arms. Another character I had was more wizard-like. I had them wear my bed sheet like a tunic, have a staff on, and then their hair sort of done more elaborately. these are simple things that only require, 2 or 3 props, but that combined with mannerisms and voices can help, again, immersion. That's what we're trying to do here, to make memorable characters and make memorable experiences for the players. One rule I try to implement is one special thing per session. Now, this kind of goes beyond just immersion, but it is something I like as a challenge for myself, to come up with something new to compel the players. That's been various things. One session, it might be a guest player that comes on and adds a new dynamic. Another session, it might be a quest board that I made myself that has various options that the players can take, and looks very of that time, and clearly there's effort put into it. Not only is it a way of showing appreciation for my players, but also helps the immersion factor, because again, having a real quest board that they can interact with does make things, it helps you as a DM, because it makes those side quests that you want them to go on more compelling. This is another one. This one's a bit different from costumes, because it is something you give the players. I found this, they had this hanger at the store that looked like a key, and so I just used it as a giant hefty metal key for a dungeon, and the players really had a kick out of it. Not only that, but with in Critical Role, they'll do health potions, which are in like a potion jar, and then the dice are within it, so you roll it to get your result. Fun things like that. You can even make, if you're good at cooking or mixology, you can make those health potions like actual drinks. Or if there's like a dinner session, like you're running Chris Strahd and you're doing the infamous dinner with Strahd, you can actually cook something. This requires a lot more effort, but again, tune it to your own skills. Like if you're good at cooking, if you're good at arts and crafts, then you can implement those into your games. You can do more interactive minigame type activities. Like I brought up actual decks of cards if we're doing like a gambling session, where I might make my own rules to the game like a fantasy, but they still get to actually play it and feel those cards, and it makes tensions high, because you're not just rolling a dice. It's different from the usual formula. It can also, if you're doing like a sort of like archery minigame, like a dartboard or something like that, just anything to do whatever options you have to put the players in an environment where they have to use different skills from just rolling a dice. And yes, well, I made a point at the beginning that most of these options are for in-person play, because that's what we finally get to go back into. They're not limited to that. Zbeshu had this one shot where he used, I believe it was Roll20, where each player could only see where they were on the map, and you had two teams that were basically, one was chasing, one was following, and they were trying to kind of find each other around the city. Things like that, where you do special things with the map, even with it just like Fog of War. There are a lot of creative options you can do with battle maps that can be done online easy enough. One thing I love to do is I'll maybe have an effect that hides the other players from one player's view, so they get sent a completely different map that has none of their allies with it. So if they're casting AoEs, they have no idea where their allies are. They have to guess and communicate. Handing players actual maps or papers, if they're like given letters or things like that. You can also, one thing I really like that Matthew Colville does is he will give other people who aren't the players agency within his world. Like he might make one of his friends who's a veteran in war games in D&D position as like a warlord or something, and they'll be doing things behind the scenes while that affect the game indirectly, and it's really interesting to kind of see how that plays out. And then later maybe you can bring them on for a guest session and have the players and simultaneously their PCs realize what's been going on. And that realization that it was another player who's been pulling the strings this entire time is a really satisfying moment. While it can be simple, small things, you can also go as big as you want. I've seen D&D themed escape rooms that can be entire sessions, which can be a lot of fun if you love puzzles. Again, making those puzzles more elaborate, like you give your players a puzzle and you have like an actual physical thing for that. One simple thing that really is interesting for immersion, back to battle maps, is using like board game maps, like the game Don't Break the Ice as a board game map, where as they go along, the ground begins to fall beneath the players as the battle goes on. There's this one game called Forbidden Desert, where basically every turn sand covers the tiles and kind of hides things below, and you can kind of excavate those tiles to find things beneath, so it can be that can bring their own dynamics like sandstorms to that battle map, or a game like Labyrinth, where the tiles shift. Interesting things that make combat more interesting and dynamic. I said interesting twice, but isn't that the point here? You can bring in puppets, you can write a shanty and perform it. That's gonna really get the players gonna kick out. They might end up having to recite it later to recall something that happened, to kind of make a connection because there's a hidden message within the song you wrote. And it's fun to write shanties and perform it. This is not just for the players, but also for you, because making this extra effort should be whatever of these options I list, or at least kind of get something incubating in your mind that makes you say, I want to try that, and I can't wait to see how the players react to this. Because that's kind of the magic of immersion and taking this a step further, is that you get that excitement where it's not session prep is not a pain, and you can just sort of be joyful of this novelty. And even if you've been a DM for whether it's 6 months or 20 years, you get to have this sense of wonder and novelty, and same for the players. And I think there's a magic in that, whether it's something as large as a murder mystery or as simple as a prop. It's something that makes D&D more than just a game, and there's value in that. I hope some of those tips were helpful. Personally, I tend to talk about things that I think are important and passionate, because immersion really has worked for me, and I hope it's something that can work for y'all too. And if you're a player, send this to your DM. If you're a DM, please take advantage of it if you think it's interesting. But until then, this is Sean from Dirty Dungeon, signing out.